It's past 10 Mountain Time, 9:04 Nelson time, called meeting to order. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging and respecting the Indigenous people within whose traditional lands we're meeting today. Looking for a motion to adopt the agenda as circulated. I see it moved and seconded in the room. All in favor? Nothing added. Staff picking up. That is carried. Also looking for a recommendation to offer freedom of the floor to Director Popov. And when he joins as well for Director Newell, he said he might be 15, 20 minutes late. So freedom of the floor. Yep, moved and seconded. All in favor? That's carried. I should double check Emma. Are you good for attendance, Sam? There's 3 of us in the room and Director Tierney online.
Yeah, I've got everyone down.
Okay, great, thanks. And we have received the minutes. The last East Resource Recovery meeting was way back in July. Received the minutes. They, of course, already went to board and I don't even see the issue. So having said that, we will turn it over to Manager Wilson. Amy, if you want to, your floor is yours. If you want to start with the refuse disposal budget. That's 186.
Okay. Thank you. And does the chair want to just address questions as we go?
Yep, it's easiest.
Okay. All right, so the requisitions for this year is at 8%. It was slated to be 7% in last year's budget. And 27 will be a 5% increase, which previously was 3%, and then 3% in all the subsequent years, which is what it was in the previous budget. The other thing that we have addressed in sales of service, which is our tipping fees, you can see that we're about 50,000 under expected, and that seems to be consistent across all the sub-regions. Tipping fees can vary quite a bit based on development and projects throughout the areas, but as a number of other factors. So what we have proposed, and you'll see at the joint meeting this week, is a 2.4% increase to tipping fees to address inflation, and then a 4% increase, so that's 6.4% in total. And that 4% is based on the 5-year plan as the recommendation of the cost recovery study. And so that would be a 4% each year for the first 4 years and then 3% in the 5th year to try and attain the goal of cost recovery through tipping fees.
So Amy, and has that already been signaled? I guess we discussed it at the other meetings, but the municipalities are putting out their utility bills, including their garbage collection fees. Is that what they have already anticipated? 2.4 plus 4?
Correct. We sent out a letter in September, October. It was, we actually did have a few municipalities message us in the past few weeks and inquire about it. So it seems that the email address that was associated with their accounts might have been more of a finance related position, and some of that message did maybe not make it to those that did budgets. So we reissued the letter to all the municipalities as a follow-up just in the last couple of weeks. So they were notified.
And Creston addressed it at our council meeting
council
last week.
Okay, and so just in general, I mean, because we always start looking for, well, can we reduce taxation? Or, matching taxation roughly is our sale of service or our tipping fees. And for this year, no, because our municipal partners are locked in on that. And if we want to do it for next year, we have to start talking about it well in advance. So, okay, thanks, Amy. Carry on.
It looks like Director Popov has his hand up.
Oh, sorry, and please, just speak up. Go ahead, the floor is yours. I've got too many things to look at. Go ahead, Director Popov.
Thank you, Chair Jackman. really appreciate it. I know I've asked this question before, but can you provide a clarification of the 4% cost recovery? This is basically new. I haven't seen that in other budgets. It equates to a 6.4 increase in tipping fees. Can you give us a brief outline so whoever's on there is on public or whatever, so we have a better understanding?
Yes,
Amy, I
absolutely.
guess that's from the consultant study. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so the resource recovery plan recommended that we did systems efficiency review and cost recovery assessment, which we did. And so we presented the results of the cost recovery, identifying in our effort to have a user pay system, the tipping fees were not meeting cost recovery. And so we assessed the increases that would be required to get us there for the materials that we do charge tipping fees for. And there was two options. One was a 3-year plan to make our way up to that cost recovery goal, or a 5-year plan. And that the 3-year plan had, I think there were 8% around that most of the years. So this plan is following the 5 years, so over a longer period, but less of an impact. So the 4% each year is to obtain that cost recovery goal.
Further, Director?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, that explains a great, rather than increasing the tipping fees to a certain amount to accommodate the cost recovery, we were showing cost recovery, what it actually costs us to do the tipping fees.
And that study was quite expensive. So is that something, Amy, that we generally do in a 5-year cycle?
Yeah, we built up a fairly detailed or extremely detailed model to come up with that. And so that's something now that's built, that staff will be able to update and modify at a reoccurring. So yeah, it is something that we won't be doing every year, but it is something that we'll do on a 3 or 5 year. We'll probably do it in advance of the next round of resource recovery plan update, and just sort of see how we're doing.
Okay, thanks.
So, if I may,
Director Vandenberg? Yeah,
so
go
we're
ahead.
just trying to get caught up. I have not had a chance to take a look at the spreadsheets. My apologies, but you're talking about an 8% requisition increase for 2026 to cover the additional expenses of running the operation. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's a lot of materials, there's a lot of services, programs and materials that we manage that don't have a tipping fee associated with it. So we still have a lot of tax subsidization required for the service. So the requisitions have an 8% increase, and the tipping fees have a total of 6.4% increase. And the intention of the cost recovery of tipping fees is to try and help balance the difference between taxes and tipping fees, and so not just only leaning on one or the other.
So, okay, so what the drivers that are creating this is the volume has decreased. Perhaps, what are the drivers that are creating the 8%?
Or we can flag them for expenses. But yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I think generally similar to tipping fees, we see an inflation in the entire service. Most of our expenses have some increases this year projected. And then things like borrowing costs and other things like that are burdening the service need that revenue.
Maybe as a generality, like Amy just explained, when we had our cost recovery discussion, how fast we ramp up tipping fees, we decided to spread it over the 5 years instead of 3. So we knew we'd be continually falling short. So we projected tax increases over CPI by several percent. And when Amy started, she said, this year we'd already planned to do a lifted taxation of 8 or 7%. Things have changed, like there's brand new licensing fees from the province, 11,000 out of the blue. The difference from 7 to 8% lift in taxation is only $16,000. So 11 of that is just the province said, now you're gonna do this, pay us money to review any documentation you submit. So I think as we run through it, we probably flag a half a dozen things that have changed. The big one that's changed up is our contract cost for operation of the landfill. The things that are going, rebalancing are borrowing for the septage project, which we have to get on with it, honor our commitment with the town. And I see lower numbers for October. So as we go through, I think we'll see a little bit of rebalancing there.
Well, and that's fine. I like to have an overview as to what I'm going to be watching for, because these are a lot of lines. But I also want to key in your comment about municipalities that locked in their fees.
We advise them,
Distribution.
yeah, they give out their, Director Elton could explain better maybe. They have to set up and issue their utility fees in January. So we notified them months ago. We've notified them 5 years at a time what we think our tipping fee increases are gonna be, so they can plan their budget. And then they actually have to print up, we have 2,000 houses in town. You have to print up for 2,000 properties, tax bills, and utility bills.
So that ties our hands a little bit, because we haven't even talked about the budget, but yet we're signaling that, well, we think it's gonna be here,
We talked about it
and then it
last
gets
year
locked in.
and 2 years ago.
But now is the time that we're talking about what the real numbers are.
So that's what I'm saying, we need a full year ahead. If we feel we're not keeping pace with cost recovery on the hard cost of managing this residual waste, we need the full year ahead to
And
look.
I would agree with that, because that just, and then a year from now, we're gonna go, oh, well, here we go again. It's just a challenge to keep ahead of what's real.
Yes, Director Elton, sure.
I'm just reading this though, it looks like, and my apologies, I read this, but I didn't look through last year's for comparison. But it looks like we've made, additional adjustments beyond the 2% that was projected for 2026. We're actually saying 2% plus, the 4%. If I'm reading that correctly, or am I not reading that correctly?
We had the 2.4 is the
It
inflation
was
component.
yes.
The 4%, the consultant said you are not meeting your targets for what you might expect to recover on tipping fees.
Right.
So you can add, I should throw it back to you, Manager Wilson. If you want to do it 3 years and catch up, you need 6 or 7% every year. If you want to soften the tipping fee increase and spread it over 5 years, then you need to add about 4% on top of CPI every year.
Right.
Can you remember, Amy, what the two numbers were if we were to increase our cost recovery over 3 or 5 years?
With the 3-year or the 5-year plan has a 4% increase, and the 3-year had I think it was an 8% increase.
Okay, and we rejected that. We said we were worried that impacts construction of the way, demolition, tipping fees. We rejected that. And as Amy said, yeah, go ahead.
This financial plan, so the previous year's financial plan had, was already expecting I believe it was a 3% increase in tipping fees, and I think that carried through most years through the financial plan. This now shows the 6.4 total in 26, and then it projects that 4% every year. Plus, I just use a 2% inflation. So in 27, there's a 6% in 28, 29, and then in 30, there's a 5%, because that last year it was a 3% increase for the cost recovery. So this plan is showing that projected increase through the year. So, and similarly, last year it would have had, like I said, it would have the 3% for every year. So the plan does show the future forecast. And the letter that we sent to municipalities and account holders said that we were projecting between a 3 and a 9% increase based on finalizing budgets and then the board decision at this week's meeting. So, I think that we have demonstrated an expected increase annually. This year is when we started that cost recovery piece.
And if we wanted to divert from the taxation increases projected in future years, then we'd have to wait for Todd Johnston to bring his amendment of his favorite bylaw. That's our fees and charges bylaw across the entire RD. And because we have similar tipping fees across all the subregions, that becomes a joint resource recovery conversation. And so when would we look at that next? Just trying to think, when would we review the fees and charges next summer?
No, we have it coming this week. So we're doing.
But if we want to change it radically from the projection over the next 5 years, we would have to have that conversation in the summer, I would think. So
Yeah,
that
we
the
will do that.
municipalities have to be on board.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
finally, I'll be asking when we, and I should say, let's continue on. But one of the drivers is going to be the amount of volume that's coming in. And what is the trend? Are we seeing less volumes? Are we seeing higher volumes? So I'll ask that one later.
So Andy, you said we did have a little drop in projected volume during 2025, but construction slowed, so.
Yeah, through the chair, we plan to bring a report early in the new year that will demonstrate trends in volumes and materials and that kind of thing.
Okay, carry on then, please.
Okay, thank you. So onto the user, so line 8, that's the user fee. So that is a mix of some of our metal and scrap metal rebate and the septage tipping fees. And so that we split 50-50 with the Crescent, and then there's an amount that we've been doing increases lately, that amount is getting directly funneled into a septage reserve to help with the financing of the upcoming project.
So on 19 and 20 on financing, and we have a member of the public, just if you look at this on the left column, Sean, there's line items. So we're projecting much lower cost for the stabilizing berm right now. But we will be ready to move ahead with the septic receiving facility with the town. The smaller number projected for 2026 for the toll berm, you're going to cover that more detail later, I guess, are you?
I will, because we split the financing for that project up. So the portion that is the berm, we're using financing for, that was approved through the resource recovery plan. And the closure of cell 1CD is actually getting financed or funded through the landfill closure reserve, because that is a closure project.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So
Through the chair, can we make sure that we're referring to the line item numbers so that we're able to follow the lines of questions, not the account numbers, but the line item numbers. When we're talking in those terms,
That's 19 and 20.
thank you.
Okay, thanks, Amy.
okay, so we can we were in the proceeds from borrowing. So yeah, as you noted on line 18, there's borrowing, again, that's long-term borrowing approved under the resource recovery plan for the legacy landfills. Sorry, back up to line 16. So that was the closure of phase 2. That actually, we likely will do that funding from the landfill closure reserve, pending what's remaining in there. But it's also, we had it in the, I think it was projected for design in 29 and the closure in 2030. The closure plan for that, for phase 2 right now, projects that we won't actually be required to do that work until 31 or 32. So I left the line there as a placeholder. Similar in the capital expenses. just as a reminder that that's coming up, but it's not in this 5-year plan at this time. And then what I noted, just mentioned line 19. So that's about a $2 million project for the phase 1 CD closure. That's on the very west slope of the landfill. It's an old cell that wasn't closed. It's quite steep. And then there's a stabilizing berm at the bottom of it. So previously that was all going to be funded by long-term loan. We've split it up. So just the berm portion would go through the loan, and the other portion would come in through that landfill closure reserve. And then as you noted on line 20, the borrowing for the septic receiving station. The committee's aware that we had put that through in our resource recovery plan for long-term borrowing. The province denied that, and we are going to have to investigate other methods of funding. So right now it's in the plan as short-term borrowing, but that is, I think that what we need to do some work to consider if there's either a process we go through for electoral approval and go through long-term borrowing, or continue to look at grants and potentially reserves on how to offset that borrowing cost, because it's fairly hefty for a short-term borrowing.
And what is the term on 5?
Sorry, this question on the short-term borrowing is up to 5 years. You must repay it all, so that's, 400,000 a year.
Yeah.
300.
Yeah. So line 22, that's the amount that we get from interchange or the used oil. And they've notified us after we did all the lobbying, both to them and the province, about our challenges with interchange and the cost of hosting them at our events. Staff provided a very detailed cost assessment or cost analysis of what it costs to co-host their materials at our events. And they've agreed to increase the rate, so that we're quite happy. Previously it was $1,500, and they've now said it'll be they expected between 2,000 and 3,000 an event. So they haven't confirmed that amount. You'll see on line 20, on mine, there's no number on it. Is there a number on yours?
Yeah, there's the skip number there, yes.
Between 22 and 23?
Yeah, so 22.5, that is a new line for us, and that's because the interest on our reserves will be retrieved in the service here, so that's a new line there. Okay, so the transfer from reserve section, so line 24, that's the combination of all the capital projects that were funded by regular reserves that aren't funded by some other type of borrowing or grant or other. The transfer on line 26, that was completed in 25. So that was both for the economic development and the land purchase. So that was completed in 25. Then this is where the other transfer on line 27, that's the other half of the project for the 1 CD closure. So that is out of the landfill closure reserve. And then pending when the septic facility moves forward, the transfer from the Growing Communities Fund is dedicated towards the septic facility project. So that's that 95,000 on line 28. Moving down, it looks to have line 35. Some of the funds in that large surplus realized in 25, that 891,000, is some of the recalculations going through the auditors for the landfill provisions and the asset retirement. So that a lot of those funds, I think 700,000, I'll confirm when we get further down, is being transferred into the landfill closure reserves. Okay, so that's it for revenues. Any questions before we get into expenses?
Just I'm gonna go to line 38, the total revenue. Our budget was for 6 million and change. And year end of 2025, it will be a drop to 4.8. That's what you're talking about with the lower revenues in the beginning of our conversation.
Through the chair, not entirely, because that total revenue includes borrowing and reserve transfers for work that was deferred or didn't occur in 25. So if you look at line 40, that's the tipping fees. That's where you can see that difference of the around 50,000 less in tipping fees.
So is the relevant line number here then 46?
Yes, because that would include both the tipping fees and taxes.
Taxes to whom?
Well, yeah, the requisition. Operating side is,
So
but the difference in the largest difference is that we didn't do something that we pushed it another year. On the total budget.
Okay.
right.
Okay, go ahead then, please, Amy, into expenses.
Yes, thank you. So here we have one item here is on line 48, the waste spotters and the landfill attendants have become the same role in the budget. That was intended to happen in January, and it didn't actually end up occurring until mid-25. So that's why there was some value in line 48 when there was no budget. But that would have been added to the line. It was budgeted in the line below on line 49, where there's both the waste spotters and landfill attendants.
And that's, you'd explain it, the other ones to give us flexibility in what role they fill.
Yeah, it allows the waste spotters to and the landfill attendants to swap each other out, which the collective agreement requires. We give breaks, and we were having a challenge doing that when there was no one to substitute. So this way, the staff on site can accommodate each other's the break, and we don't have to have two people on shift for the landfill attendant. Okay, and then that all that follows through for overtime and benefits. The health and safety is just generally our allowances and supplies for the site, and the check-in monitoring expenses. Not a lot of change there. Similarly with directors, some of the directors' fees are split between the waste recycling and composting services. So that's consistent with previous years. Travel, the line 67, that's for our lead hands, and the other line 68 is for out of area travel for our attendants. Not a lot of change in the coming account. So if there's anything anybody wants to point out and ask questions about, please let me know. Majority of them had the 2.4 inflation applied to it. On line 84, there. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to jump to 94. Go for it. There's
Okay, so
a couple line numbered there. Yep.
Sure. So 84, we've got a little bit extra money in 26 and 27 to help with some of the additional advertising for the ICI. That's the Institutional, Commercial, and Industrial regulation for organics. So that's why there's a jump in those years. Sorry, you had a question about 94?
Oh, yeah, we have 94 and a third, 94 and 2/3 when you roll it. Two new line items, and that's the province telling us that they happily want to charge us net $11,000 more to look at pieces of paper that they're supposed to look at anyway.
That's correct. And so those are proposed fees, and obviously if those changes don't occur, we'll revise this budget in next year's plan. The license and permits account here, so all those sort of in 94 to 97 range. includes not just the licenses with the province and so on for water or other permits, but it also includes the east portion of the scale software drone licenses. And we have an access agreement with the Lower Kootenay Band for sampling on their property down below the landfill.
So the drone, is it shared between all regions? Is it dedicated and shared between all regions?
Through the chair, yes, it's Resource Recovery purchased it. We just had to buy a replacement one, and we're actually now splitting it with the project management service as well. So there's an annual software fee, and so far the Environmental Services Department is the one that owns it and covers the cost, and it's split between all 3 subregions. If any of the other departments decide to utilize it, then we might consider doing that, but it'd be charged out by an hourly rate, I'm assuming.
Okay, and presumably that has a LiDAR lens on it then, because you're going to be measuring volumes.
Correct.
Thank you.
And you might expect a request from Preston to use the drone in the cemetery to do some mapping and give a little bit of information for future planning on that service.
No, that's GIS. That's a different department. GIS would run their own drone, presumably.
Does GIS have a drone, Amy?
Actually, through the chair, that is the Resource Recovery drone. Right now, the GIS is actually operating it, but it is owned and paid for by Resource Recovery, and that's what Amy was referring to. We are expanding the use of that drone now to other departments. In part, there was concerns and considerations about using it outside of landfill area because of the privacy piece that has been resolved now. So we have started to use it for construction projects, i.e. utility projects. And from there out, it's going to be used in other areas. We are talking about transferring this drone over to GIS. They are operating it already, and it makes sense if there's multiple department use in the future to be owned and serviced and replaced out of the GIS service. So there's a transition underway right now.
Thanks, Julie.
Thanks.
Okay, so line 99, legal, that was the expenses for the land transfer, and that's completed. We don't project any more in the financial plan. Line 101, that is for some consulting support at Creston, largely to do with our greenhouse gas and the flare inspection and maintenance. To 102, we completed the hydrogeo, I think in 23, so they're on a 5-year rotation, so that next one is coming up in 28. We are underway with the design, operation and closure plan on line 103, and so we expect to have majority of that completed in 26. We have actually just submitted the operational certificate amendment, and that will that's the mechanism of which we're going to apply for an exemption to the landfill criteria for the liner and leachate collection. So that information will greatly influence the rest of the plan for the remainder of phase 2 and whether or not we can continue to operate without a liner. Line 104 is a reoccurring benthic study, and so that is expected in 26.
What is that?
That's down on Lower Kootenay Band's property. We're looking at the vegetation in the muck to find out if there's any contamination, correct, Amy? And is that being done by Yakanuki?
It's invertebrates, so it's sampling essentially the health of the ecosystem in the superficial soils and immediately down from the landfill. It in the past has been completed by 2 different consultants, so we'll go through a request for proposal process to hire that one out. Okay, so moving into contracted services, all of the dust control was previously budgeted in the repairs and maintenance because we didn't have a multi-year contract. So we've now done a multi-year contract for dust control across the district. So that's a new expense in all these O&M work orders. It's a few thousand per site, but it did have some impact. This one had there's not a lot of change to things like our snow removal and bin hauling. You'll see online, I guess 10 and a third or 110 and a third. Sorry, I apologize that those numbers didn't get carried through. This can be a little finicky sometimes. So the Boswell Organics Haul, that's a proposed service. So with CBT, Columbia Basin Trust, we have grant funding to support rural organics diversion, and there was 5 locations we spoke about doing sort of a either bear-proof bins or carts within a bear fenced area where we could collect organics, and then our sites would essentially become one of the ICI collection points for, or like we'd hire a service for that collection with smaller totes. So it's not us trying to fill up roll-off bins, it's trying to manage smaller materials. So again, that's pending whether, and so the installation of those bins and so on, and then developing a program. And we won't proceed with it until we continue with costing and investigating the potential for service in some of these areas. Line 110 and 2/3 is a new one as well. So our legacy landfill first stage of work has been completed, and there's a couple of sites where we have to increase our environmental monitoring. So Boswell, or actually it's Destiny Bay, the old landfill location, that's one of the sites where we will be doing some additional groundwater and surface water sampling.
And on those, Amy, if the better monitoring proves out that there's not a big issue about contamination or issues with the plume, I think you were saying at one of the other meetings that we may not have to go through the expensive permanent closure process that you originally set placeholders for.
Or at least to a very limited degree. So there will be the minor stuff like litter cleanup, and there may be some sections where we have to add soils, but there is, at this point, if accepted by the ministry, these plans accepted by the ministry, there's not a massive project of full closure of the site required.
Which is good news.
Yes, great news. So similar comments about the Crawford Bay O&M. And then again, we have the organics hauling and the let's see what we've got. So we have on line 120, that is for the invasive program, and we have.
You don't want to, sorry, Amy, you don't want to skip 115, do you? That is the big jump, right?
Oh, sorry, yes, 115.
Fill up.
Correct. So the budgeted amounts were a good 110 over what we had previously, based on our new landfill contract. So on that, if we were looking at our cost recovery study with this kind of number, we'd be a lot more than 4% per year over 5 years. So that's what I was wondering, if we're going to use a consultant to redo those calculations, or if you said that you can be doing it in-house. And I don't know what the contract prices look for everywhere else, but I think Preston Landfill is the only one that was hit with a big increase like this. Udashenia's new contract is
much more modest increase, isn't it? So how do we rework the cost recovery with such a huge jump in that landfill contract?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that the Udashenia contract still had extensions remaining in it, and GFL was willing to work with that under the annual contract price adjustments, which was good news. I think we actually still have this. We just extended it. And I think there's one more extension remaining, and what we had heard from then when we were speaking about the Creston contract, and as we saw in all the bids, is that the pricing has gone up significantly. Not just fuel. One of the bigger things that they've mentioned is repairs and maintenance and parts and things like that. So sort of everything involved was increased. I think that the cost recovery assessment is something that I could speak to staff about, and whether or not we can. I don't know if we can do it by particular area or sub-region. It was more of a general across the district assessment when we're looking at that for the first 4 years and 3% in the final year.
So how many days a week are we open in the landfill, Creston?
5 days. And staff is in the process of doing a hours of operation review. And I believe we'll be bringing that in January. Some of the subregions, they have sites that we're recommending some reductions in hours. There's also a few locations where we're recommending an increase in hours. So the net difference in some of the subregions is not much of a cost savings. In fact, some of them, there might be a cost increase. The East, I believe, is one of the one subregions where the recommendations do result in an overall cost decrease, but it's, it'll be up to discussion with the committee as to whether or not we want to follow through with some of them. It won't necessarily affect things like the operations contract, but we could save money on salaries essentially.
Right, and so why would it affect the operations contract? Are they running while the landfill could be closed with a reduction of hours?
I mean, this big contract cost is heavily dominated by the equipment cost.
Yeah.
So the equipment, if it's running or not, is a static cost, is a fixed cost that's there. And the staffing piece is a small component in that overall contract. So the only time a reduction in hours would net any significant contract impacts is if we get to the threshold that they can say we can go from 2.5 staff to 2, or from 1.5 staff from 2 to 1.5 staff on that site. I don't think we make that threshold, so all we see is a few hours of wages at the contractor side, and that won't make in a big contract like this a significant difference.
And through the chair, if I can add to that, we explored this at the time of when we reissued the RFP for this contract with only the landfill and not the compost. We actually had it structured so that we asked for a price for regular hours, and then we asked for a price for reduced hours, and there was little to no change from all the contractors. I think there was maybe a $5,000 difference in the annual price in GFL's bid.
And we got to be clear too that the equipment hours don't change much, because if you compact the same amount of waste, if you transport the same amount of waste just in a shorter period of time, your daily equipment hours stay practically the same.
But the amount of waste has gone down.
Last year, it was below estimate, yes, but it's variable.
So that's why the trends is an important piece to understand. Yes.
Okay, so that's our single biggest increase. Didn't want you to jump over it.
Great,
Back to you.
I thought we only discussed the $1,000 and $2,000 line items, but
Yeah.
Sure. Okay.
Another one to point out would be line 118. So that's where we do the largest of that cost there is associated with the wood grinding. And with the change that we've done with the dirty wood, clean wood, we're seeing smaller piles. So the expense for that was quite a bit less in 25, and so that's what we've continued to project through the financial plan.
116 is a reduction. Any specific reasons? New contract?
Yeah, it must have been. Okay, as I mentioned on line 120, that is invasives, and we are going to be utilizing the Parks Department for some of the manual treatment rather than CCAS. So there'll be a balance of CCAS providing some of the services and our internal parks staff. And so there's a transfer to the Parks Department for that support.
So same cost, just showing in transfer to other services.
Yes. Yep. So line 20 and a half, I guess, and 121, that is the Eco Depot is the top one. The request for proposal the request for expression of interest for Creston, Castlegar, and Nakusp is currently posted. And so we could see the Eco Depot as early as mid to late 26. So essentially the cost between those two line items is to fund the hazardous waste collection, but then expecting that we would have a depot, that cost gets projected through the Eco Depot line moving forward. As mentioned at some of the other meetings, if we were not successful in the expression, if we do have interested parties, and we have heard that there are a couple of outfits in the Creston area that might be, then we would move to a request for proposal likely. And if not, then staff has started to do some cost analysis on establishing these at our own location, so likely out at the landfill, or potentially finding a new recycling depot in town. The current location is not big enough to expand materials.
When is the tender closing in?
I don't recall how long we posted it for.
So would we have tender results by January?
Well, we would have the expression of interest results by January. Do you recall when that posted?
So, yeah.
I think that's February. Sorry?
And that posted on that easy.
Mid-February. Okay.
Okay.
So,
It might not be in time for the budget.
yeah, okay.
Okay, and then Director Vandenberg was asking about how you're getting the message out. Like how's this posted or be direct contacted parties?
Both. So we've got it on the website. I believe it's on BC Bid, and we've sent it out to parties. We're more than happy to directly share if you have any contacts you wanted to pass along.
Well, you know who was kind of interested before, so you probably said you have 2 interested parties already.
Yeah.
There'd be an offline conversation, I guess. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So repairs and maintenance, we have seen significant increases in repairs and maintenance, especially in regards to equipment and bins and things like that. We have a placeholder for potentially moving some of the recycling or all of the recycling up to the top area. And this story is in Boswell on line 124. We're still investigating if there's sufficient space up there, especially for servicing the bins. Then we had a number of, so on line 127, we did some pretty significant repairs to the iron grizzly plates, and that's what we use as our alternate daily cover at the landfill. And so we have just an ongoing repair budget for those. Nothing really significantly changed there. Similar for operating supplies, and so just sort of ongoing consumables.
How many grizzlies do you have out there?
Each landfill's a little bit different. I think Creston has 8.
8 grizzlies, okay, because they're pretty heavy duty. Who's beating the heck out of them?
Yeah, I mean, they're sort of the loader links onto some hooks on the back, and they have to move them in and out every day, and they do need some wear and tear. Both, I think Creston and Udashinia actually replaced a few. Some of them had gone past the point of repair.
I see that you've got general repairs and scale maintenance in on that line item too, so at first I thought it was just all grizzly repairs, but it's not, so.
Yeah, there's a handful of repairs associated on that line.
Which
So
I would like to
online-
take the opportunity right now and comment that I appreciate your comments section.
Oh, the level of detail. It's
The
really
level of
nice.
detail is awesome, and again, thank you for that.
Thank you. It's helpful for us during the year as well, because then when admin is coding invoices, they can see where it's where the costs were supposed to be allocated, so it's helpful through the year as well. So 138, that's equipment, so that is rolled over. We have the and this is largely to do with the new scale system. We do have so Roman was where we were trialing the plate reader, and that has been just recently onboarded, and so just kind of working the kinks out there where it's close to us and IT. And once that has been rolled out, then we will be putting those at all the locations that have scales. And the other one that's on there is the portable devices. So those are Androids, so like cell phones. They have one so far per sub-region, and we're trialing that out. And we're excited to start using these, because then the landfill attendants that are at the tipping area can check back and forth with the scale house as to what was reported, and take pictures and a number of things that I think will be very helpful in our load acceptance. Utilities, those are
Just a thought on that load assessment, if I may.
Yeah.
That, I mean, as a user, I'm familiar with the process, and to have that ability to communicate back and forth is a good idea, because not all of us are honest when we show up with our truck full of stuff. And but that said, there is no signage to let people know that loads are being monitored for contents. Because that signage may stop anybody from trying to finagle something that they ought not to be bringing in. And you sure hate to have that confrontation with somebody that, you know, has brought something that they shouldn't have brought in, or put it in the wrong area, and then the staff has to confront that person. Just a suggestion that maybe a notice of sorts, a sign, could help alleviate that.
Yeah, thank you. I took a note of that. I appreciate that. Okay, a couple of placeholder lines. So here, like starting on 148, this is debenture is our long-term loan section. So line 148 is the berm portion of that project. So that was reduced because the other half, or the one CD closure slope would be funded by the landfill closure reserve. Line line 149, that was where we had allocated the septic facility. We are not able to do long-term borrowing at this time, so that has been moved down to short-term borrowing. The line 150, we have, oh, sorry, I'm gonna move that 82,000, that should be bumped out into 31. I'll make that adjustment. So that was line 150. So that's the phase 2 closure that is now scheduled to following the financial plan here. Line 152 is the borrowing for the legacy landfills, and 153 is a combination of all the pre-existing loans for past projects. So we have line 155 is where we move the short term, the borrowing for the septic facility.
But that is shown as a long term. You've amortized it over 20 years there.
No, that one is a short term borrowing.
What's the total amount for that though? Is much higher.
That's the interest portion, and I used a.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, right. Never mind. Yeah,
Yeah.
run the interest. So, okay.
So then 157 through 162 is the principal on the debenture that we just spoke about. Line 164 is the principal for the short-term borrowing. So yeah, as you see there, it's very hefty. Yeah. So if we are having to finance it through short term, you can see that it's a pretty major impact to the service. Hence why it's going to be really critical to be investigating grants and other methods of funding.
But when you say grants, is this the kind of thing we're going to end up in competition with the rest of the regional districts to try and get a large, significant Build Canada grant? Something like that, like where else, other than community works funds, which in so far it's only been ABAC contributing, because town is maybe appropriately putting all their community works into things like their sewage plant. Like what grants would you contemplate could come up with $1.7 million?
Through the chair, it would be investigating all of them. It was put forward on the list. What was the infrastructure grant program? But I don't.
Yeah, sorry.
They're almost a faint hope because, as I say, we end up in competition with each other. Even the last round we put in, we had 3 going, and I think there's a motion rather, where Nelson said, we'll take Castledor off the list because Nelson is instead for recreation. So are there any solid, are we being overly optimistic using the word grant? Or are we going to have to come up with either re-examining our reserves or some other way to get this 400,000 a year paid down?
Through the chair, I think we might need to consider reserves and yeah, the other option is going out to the public and establishing a septic service that can and getting electoral approval to do long-term borrowing a different way than a resource recovery plan.
This is something maybe East has to sit down with in a few months, not leave it too long to think through the options or look more seriously at the options. My gut instinct is, we wanted, I'm going to use the term offload, we have public in the room, but we want this to just go to Town of Creston and us not have to be forever involved in this roundabout thing of managing a rural septic. So I'd rather be looking at reserves, whatever is legitimate amount we can pull out of reserves. If we're able to replenish those reserves over 10 years instead of 5, that kind of thing. But it's still going to end up at a couple $100,000 boost a year. So I guess when is the best time to have that conversation about those options? Because I don't hold a lot of hope out for grants. We're kind of looking at austerity. I don't think there's $1 million floating here and there right now for these kind of projects.
So when we speak about using reserves, there's a little bit more to that because again, the reserves are shared over all participants in this service, which includes the town of Creston. So again, we would have to do separate bookkeeping about using reserves and repaying these reserves that are largely benefiting rural areas. So it's complex one way or another that the solution, and we need to see as well from the legal side of things. Right now, this is clearly embedded in the waste service. Like I said, the cleanest version would be, as Amy pointed out, that we do a public assent process, establish a way, septic service on its own. The big question is, what do we do if it fails? What are our legal obligations that allow us to proceed in this way? When we do the public assent process in a way, we need to be aware what are the next steps if it fails, because it's the worst thing to do is do a public assent process and then proceed with the same measures in a way anyhow, even that the public said no. So this is a difficult one to maneuver through, and it requires more discussion outside of the budget discussions.
Fair enough. And so I guess my question is, when would we start that conversation? I would rather not put this on a alternative process if you're coming up to an election year. I'd rather we give, everybody enough time and Mr. Dool enough time to get this onto the ballot if it needs to go that route. So if you come back to us when we should have more detailed conversation about options.
Would the directors be ready for a discussion over the course of the 2026 year? I mean, it will be then pre-election discussion.
Yeah, but we have to work backwards from when a ballot question has to be approved, right? So maybe if you could let us know when it's, and I see Director Bob's hands up, but just let us know how much lead time if we're going to go that route. And I appreciate your comment that the town of Creston has contributed to reserve, but remember they have 30 septic tanks in town, and there's only about 1,500 in Area A. So Creston has to pay something. Director Bob.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I do agree with Manager Wolf about making the septage a separate discussion in 2026 because, we're looking at the lagoon and the cusp, the Otashenya one. And now I understand there's a private septage company that is trying to establish a lagoon somewhere in the Slocan area up Springer Creek Road. So yeah, we definitely need a discussion on that. What are the provincial regulations on it? How long can we have those lagoons? And who do we have to work with? So that's just my comment on that. It needs a longer discussion.
If I may, through the chair, the discussion West and Central is slightly different than the discussion in Creston, because in Creston we have already established a willing partner, municipal partner, to do the treatment piece. It is about allocating the cost that project would trigger and how we recover it and how we in the future structure that cost recovery piece, particularly in the rural areas. So we are 1 or 2 steps ahead of that process in the east than we are in central and west.
Yeah, well, thank you, Uli. I understand that, but I thought at this time I'd put my oar into the septic situation in the west that's happening. Thank you.
So, sorry, and when I say a step ahead, that's not necessarily true, because the west sub-region is actually 1 step ahead in regards to having already an established service. So you are not affected by the question around public assent. You have a service, and that is a big step ahead of others.
You may require assent if you exceed the taxable limit though, right? So that's S-190? Yeah.
Yeah, to be honest, I haven't really looked at that service with that lens, but that is something I still have to do, yeah.
Okay, back to Amy, I guess, please.
Okay, thank you. So the contribution to reserve section, you can see that the contributions to reserves are not sizable, especially in 28, it's quite limited. So that's something to keep an eye on, and could, pending differences in the financing, especially of the septage, if we don't have that large contribution to the principal, I could see recommending that majority of that would get transferred into this line so that we are adding more to our reserves. Line 171, I think I mentioned at the beginning that line, that 880,000 of big portion. I think I mentioned it was 700,000 of that that prior year surplus, but it's, sorry, I correct that, it's 600, and then there was the 280, that's the placeholder. And so that 280 is based on a calculation we do for the landfill closure reserve funding. And so it's based on the filling that occurred during the year and the capacity or the airspace it takes up in the cell that it's currently in, and it tracks what amount is required to fund the landfill closure at the end of the lifespan of the landfill. So that's a placeholder. That 280 is a placeholder for now until that calculation is updated for this year. And so those funds go into that landfill closure reserve that is new for this service. So the transfer to other services section has a number of different items. We have new accounts developed this year so that those are clearly defined on which services they're going to. So you'll see that line 174 is a transfer to project management. And for the most part, what I've done is gone through the capital expenses, identified which projects would be supported by project management, and added a 5% inflator for that value. And for a lot of the bigger construction projects, project management has been supporting in project implementation, but also in some inspection services that normally we'd hire consultants to do. So, and that was proven to be quite successful, especially we utilized it heavily in our the West transfer station upgrades that we did last year and the year before, and saved us a lot of money on consulting fees to have that in-house inspection occur. Line 175 is the transfer to recycling. We did see some improvements in the incentives, but we also saw some increases to expenses. So there is a minor reduction, not as much as we'd like to see, and Recycle BC will be doing new incentive rates in January as after they did their cost assessment, made the significant increase to incentives in January of 25. They also committed to doing cost assessments and doing annual adjustments. So we're happy to see that. You'll see when we discuss the recycling service, you'll see that we have less incentives than expected, and that I'll describe that a little bit more when we get there. Transfer to other services on 176. That is both West and East transfer some funds to Central to offset the volumes expected at the Nelson Leaf Depot. So we have done surveys at the Nelson Leaf Depot of users and where they're from, and demonstrated that some people are utilizing that year-round hazardous waste depot from the east and west. So once the Eco Depot in Creston is established, we plan to remove that. And so actually I will flag that to remove in the other future years, but we do expect to continue that in 26. 177 is the transfer to the compost service. And you'll see that drops off quite a bit in 27, and that's largely because the borrowing for the compost facility drops off, so the expenses, ongoing expenses reduce comparatively. Line 177 and 2 1/3 is the transfer to park services. So that's what I had mentioned about using the in-house parks staff to support some of the invasive plant management. A new one on 177 and 2/3 is the transfer to asset management. So it's a placeholder for supporting the building and facility assessments and developing the data for the asset management program. And so it's higher in the first 3 years, getting all of the information into that program, and then it drops down just for management in later years. Line 178 is a transfer to the resource recovery service. So that's generally me and my staff and the field supervisor. And that is split between the waste recycling and compost. The next one, so general admin and IT. IT was updated with the current values. The general admin is a placeholder. I did not have the opportunity to update that with their new values. Similarly with environmental services. So those two are placeholders for now. I did see that general admin was added to planner, and it looks like it's not too far off. So that was on line 180. 184 with the environmental services. I did put a 10% inflator on that, but again, that'll be pending when that budget is finalized. And then we have capital expenses. Any questions before I jump into capital expenses? I don't see anybody.
No.
Yeah,
Let's go ahead.
so the cost on 177, 177 compost at 480,000, 88,000. I was just running up to the revenue. What is our plan with that compost? Is it being given away? Is it being sold? And if it's being sold, where is the revenues that can be viewed for offsetting that cost? Just bring me up to speed, if you will.
Yeah, so when we discuss service 1A119, we'll get into that detail. The compost for 25 was donated to the Fields Forward program. And they were going to use some in their programming and sell it. The A119 budget does show revenue from those compost sales starting in 26. So that's a decision from your committee as to whether or not we would intend to take that in-house and sell the compost as was intended, or if we would be considering continuing to with the arrangement that we had in 25. So the budget currently does for 26 is showing revenue for compost sales.
Okay.
The good thing there is Fields Forward does all the marketing and establishing, awareness that we have a local compost source now.
Yeah, and in 25, the volume was pretty minimal. So the expense of setting up the program and having staff trained and the equipment available didn't seem to warrant the revenue we would make. And so but we did really want to get the material out into the community and allow people to use it and see the benefits of it. So I think that it was helpful in 25 to get that material out there, but assuming that we'll have higher volumes in 26 moving forward, we're projecting to
And
do that.
for a setup, we would have, that's what we have done on other sites, we would have to set up a lock block enclosure to put that material in. Hand loading, no issue, but anytime you have a little bit larger volumes, you need then equipment. We don't have our own equipment out there, so we would have had to ask the contractor to load. All of these things for the amount of volume we had produced or was ready to sell, we pretty well would have just broke even on costs. So it made really sense to get the community awareness and as a side benefit, offer something to a nonprofit to do the management of that small amount of volume of material through Fields Forward.
Okay, moving into capital expenses, on line 186, we've had this item in our financial plan for some time to develop a separate asbestos area. The area that we have planned to do it is, within the wedge area, and that's the small triangle parcel between our fee simple lands where the compost and wood and metal storage areas are, and then the license of occupation where the landfill's on. And some of it is more the access through that area to get to the asbestos disposal area would be, I think, mostly, if not all, within our landfill, the property that the landfill's on. There's also some wildfire mitigation works in the preliminary stages, and they've been coming to the site just the last week. They went out to the site with staff and looked at different access points, and it might actually even work. They might want to develop a staging area in the area that we're looking for the asbestos. So there's potential that some of the site development work could be coincided with that work and potentially reduce our development costs. So that's been moved to 2027 because the wedge lease is still under works, and that's somewhat tied to our overall operating certificate and other processes underway for the landfill.
This might be a point I'll just jump in for Director Ellen's benefit. I started to scribble.
Yeah.
There was blocks of property that were surveyed out 100 years ago, and two of the parcels, when you add them up, there's a survey error. This parcel, actually this parcel left the wedge. And because reserve lines are here, they said, well, that's not divided off in reserve lines, so that's where it belongs. That's the wedge. There's a bigger history to money going back and forth over that. We'll do it some other day,
Yes.
but that's the wedge issue.
Okay, thank you.
Unintended.
Mhm.
Carry on, please, Amy.
Thank you. The next two lines are associated with the Columbia Basin Trust funding. So those are fully grant funded efforts, and some of it is, most of it is targeted at South Hall and rural diversion. So line 189, that's the septic receiving facility, and that is the value from a previous design. The town has been working with their consultants, and we've had sort of a variety of changes to the pricing, and I think it is still undergoing some more review, both by the town and their consultants as well as our staff. We now have partial support of the utilities manager, Chris Gainham, who has a lot of experience with wastewater treatment, and he will be leading a lot of the future moving septic management projects.
So maybe I can take advantage of having the town rep here. Is this gonna be tendered in 2026, or is that just unknown right now?
That is unknown.
And then in terms of, it reminds me of how we budget for hospital and care health. They'll say they want $10 million from us. We'll stick it in the budget. They'll start a year later, and then it'll take 3 years to build it. So we never actually have to budget for all of it up front. We have to, that's not correct, is it? We have to be accountable that we will be able to pay for this.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that we're gonna have to
It's still being-
pay for it all in one lump sum. So in the coming months, when we have the conversation, whatever options around how we finance this or whatever, because I can't remember, Geb's on the line, I guess he would know. If we just say we're gonna take out a 5-year loan, can we draw it in 2 or 3 increments, soften the blow, but we still have to pay it all back within the 5? Or if we take a short-term loan, do we have to take it all on day one? Versus a long-term loan, I understand there's options as to when you make draws. So I don't know, I'd be happy to wait a few months to get the answer to that, but you know, if we take a short-term loan, if we get all the money landed in our lap at once, so we start paying interest at 4%, we get investment return at 2%, cost us money to hold money.
Yep,
Yes, you know.
are you going to respond or you want me to?
Yeah, through the chair, I'll respond. Yeah, short-term loan, you generally, you take the amount all at once. So, sorry, through the chair. And so if you didn't need it all at once, then you would break it out and take 2 or 3 different short-term loans. And long-term, yeah. So, Uli, do you have anything further to add to that?
No, and just that the long-term loan is a fixed structured process of 2 separate processes or bylaws, if you want to. There's first the larger loan that is approved overall, and then we have a second step in which we then can decide how much of it we take out of that originally approved loan. So that automatic 2-step process is not there for the short-term loan.
Right, so from what Geb was saying, yeah, that rings a bell now. If we end up seeing the cash flow requirement from town when they're ready to go to tender and build, our one option might be to take out 2 or 3 smaller short-term loans, but that's something it'd be nice to see early in 2026 versus going out for a service. You know, sort of be nice to have the cash flow requirement from town sort of as soon as they have that pulled together. Okay, carry
Yes.
on.
So sorry, there's one other element to it, that on long-term loans, we are locking in for 5 or 10 years the agreement for the interest and repayment schedule. On short-term loans, and you have correct me if I'm wrong, we have the option to defer principals. Only the interest is fixed based on daily rate of the principal owing, but we have some flexibility. Let's say you take a 5-year short-term loan out, when we actually repay the principal on that short-term loan.
Yeah, through the chair, you can, you have a fair bit of flexibility to repay your principal on the short-term loans, but the interest rate changes basically daily on the outstanding principal, or adjusts daily through the chair. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Director Vandenberg, you had another question on this?
Yeah, so if we can go back to line 189 and talk a little bit more about the septage facility. Typically in this scenario, would the design be prepared by in-house / consultant and then RFP out for the construction, demolition, and so on? Or is it you have to engineer design and do the work typically?
Through the chair, this is a bit of a different scenario than normal because the town is leading the project. So I understand that they're doing a design build with a consultant. And so essentially they're leading the construction project. Is on their facility. And we we would finance and then administrate the service moving forward.
In fact, the design for the receiving station is largely done, unless you're referring to the remediation of the pits, that's coming later. But the septic receiving station design is essentially complete.
So then the one company, and thank you for exploring this with me. So the one company would go in, engineer, design, and do the construction. That's what could occur in this situation.
Actually, like I said, the design is done, and the tender would be a construction tender following this. Maybe a request for proposal piece, because there is a big portion of it is fixed equipment that would be ordered and coming in and installed. And then the other portion or half is a building pipes, the pad and receiving piping. But again, this is fully in the hands of the town of Creston, and we are just participating financially in it. We have had looks at the design portion over the course of the last couple of years that has developed. It actually went several times back to the drawing board because of increasing cost, and the town staff has scrutinized the engineering side of approach a couple of times. So the design was modified a couple of times.
All right, thank you. And I appreciate that, because what you just said is different than a design build.
Yes.
Okay, so that's what I wanted to understand. Thank you.
And maybe I'll ask another one. Is the decommissioning the old pits within this 1.7 budget, 1.7 million, or is that going to be, I thought that'll be future costs. It's not, is that included in the estimate of 1.7 million? It's separate, isn't it?
Through the chair, it was originally, I don't know if it will still, so that could be something, and that likely wouldn't happen in 26, depending on how quickly this treatment system would be constructed. So that could be something that we would see as a new item in 27, next year's plan.
Okay, thanks.
Very likely.
So line 190 is the purchase of the lands to the west, immediately down gradient of the landfill from the lower Kootenay Band. That was completed. So line 191 and 192 are both associated with the phase 1 CD closure and stabilizing berm. 191 is largely the consulting engineering works. The 109 that you'll see in 2025, I received some information from project management, and I was having a hard time teasing out what was consulting and what was works, because they've started to work on, we had to do an archaeological assessment, and they're doing timber cruising right now. So some of that 109 actually would be, I would maybe more associate with the construction works, but I wasn't able to tease it out. So I just wanted to explain that, because you'll see that the 225 was carried into 2026. Some of that, normally I would have expected to reduce that amount by the 109, but not all of that is the consulting work. So I left the 225 in 2026 as a placeholder. If we're able to use in-house inspection, and it really depends on the scope of the project, as to how much consulting services we need. So the remaining portion in 25 is finalizing the design, developing the tender, doing the tendering process, and then construction supervision. So that 225 is a bit of a placeholder, and I expect it to be lower, but I didn't want to, there's still a fair amount of work that will be carried into 25, I guess my point. 192 is the construction works, and as I mentioned previously, that funding is split half with the landfill closure reserve for the 1 CD slope closure, and then long-term borrowing for the firm portion. We left it at the original value. We do expect some reduction in cost there, but it's the design isn't completed, so it was challenging to be, and we're still doing they just completed some test pitting on the slope, and so we're still assessing that information to kind of determine what the closure needs, and they currently have a kind of a range of options there, and this information that we've gathered in the last month or so will be used to firm up that design. And ideally it's sizably less than what we have there, but it is carried over into 26 until we have that design completed.
Okay, so this is a design and construction value?
Line 191 is the design and 192 is the construction. And
Oh, I
191
see.
is, yeah, and 191 is design, tendering, and construction supervision. And then 192 is the would be the construction works.
So quite a few years ago, when Sperling Hansen first came on, as the new consultant looking at this, we had conversations about risk management options. So sounds like you're looking at slope stability again. And I think we either by ground survey or the drone, we've got better data on whether or not this pile is either subsiding or shifting or anything happening with it. Like over many years now, it's taken so long to get the land acquired. Are we gonna see as a board, is the board gonna see any options on this that would consider risk management? As opposed to a consultant just saying, do this? Because we were in that conversation years ago.
Yeah, through the chair, until I get the design and see what they're presenting as options, or if they present options, I don't know that I can say one way or the other. If there is an option and risk management decisions to be made, we certainly would bring it to you.
I mean, I can say that much, that there was definitely consideration given, and I think that's what's reflected in where we are right now. Much smaller berm than was originally projected. I'm not sure where we are in regards to minimizing liner requirements for that fairly steep slope. It's certainly considered as a low contributor to the leachate regime because it's from a lateral surface area, a relatively small area. The tricky part is more or less what type of liner we can anchor into that steep slope. But they have demonstrated over the years as a consultant are always looking for savings and reductions in scope and risk mitigation pieces that can be eliminated. You see an example of that in their approach to our legacy landfills. We have so far seen the reports that we have seen are the vast majority of them are very conservative in the measures to be taken, and they are around as a company for a long time. I know the principal, and they have, I think, a lot of credibility with the Ministry of Environment. So we'll see, but I'm fairly confident if there is options for reducing the scope of the work that they will look at that very seriously.
And when is the design expected to be available on 191? That's, it works.
I would say early in the new year.
Yeah, I would think so too. January, latest February, I would say.
Q1.
So it would be, again, maybe good that, I know we don't have a lot of sub-regional meetings, but I think for East, this is so much money if we have to handle it short term. It'd be nice if we were able to hold a East Resource meeting early in the year to be able to digest all this. you wait and see what you get from the consultant, I guess, for the next month.
So as mentioned earlier on line 193, that is the closure for 2A, and then 194 is the development for phase 2B. Those previously were sort of in the tail end of the financial plan here. We confirmed that they can be deferred by a couple of years, that we have capacity for filling. So 2A, which had about 100,000 for the design, we will project that in 2031, and then the construction would be 2032. The cells between 2A and 2B have a fair amount of overlap, and so we've reached out to the consultants to get an update on what portion of 2A would actually need final closure versus more of an intermediate closure. But when we move into 2B, I think they're projecting around a 20-year lifespan, and some of that portion of that time will be affected by our application to the province with our operating certificate amendment to not install a liner. So we may or may not have that long, depending on how they respond to our request. So anyways, I just left that as a placeholder and left those years and values again, so that we recall that those expenses are coming up. And then on the 194, I left the budget in 2030 for the development consulting for 2B, and then we expect in 31 that there would be around a $400,000 development. As we go through the plan and see how we're transitioning from 2A to 2B, the construction could be less if we're just simply moving into different areas and we don't have substantial road and borrow and various other preparations. But right at this point, until we move into these two line items, will be entirely influenced by our design, operation, and closure plan, which we don't have yet. So that is expected in 26, and so next year's financial plan should, and depending a response from the ministry on our OC amendment, I suspect that the 27 budget would have a lot more refinement on not just the cost, but the phasing and the timing of all these expenses. So for now, these are our placeholder values.
So maybe, I have in my mind a picture of kind of where all these different zones are, different phases. But maybe it would help the committee. I think last time you sent out some of the older reports. I'm just pulling up some of the images of the landfill that I have up on this computer. It would be helpful maybe to just have the map that shows what is, 1E, 2A, all these different designated areas. Not the whole report, not 100 pages with all the detail, all the contours, all the moving parts, but just so people had, if you were able to email, in the next not too long, just so everybody had a little map in front of them. And then the other one was just trying to bring Dr. Houghton up to speed on what is the wedge, and what is the buffer, and what is the required land and stuff like that. So that's, you guys had some really good presentation images. The one I'm looking at right now is from 4 or 5 years ago, and just in a snapshot, say, oh yeah, that's where everything is. So sort of the overall map, maybe from one back, if we set public presentation on the land transfer, I think credit treaty agreement, just showing in color code what does the gross site look like, and then the other one, the fill plan, just showing each phase. Would help, I think, everyone in this region understand when you're referring to all these future multi-million-dollar projects, sort of where it lays.
Yeah, certainly. So when we return with some of the sort of trends and tonnages and the diversion numbers, we can have a map available to discuss a few of these things. The phase 1A, 2A and 2B, that fill plan document was appended to the landfill operations contract, and that was, so when you got the report a couple of months ago for the contract award, it was appended to that. And so I remember one of the directors had asked about, and I I was having a hard time pulling it up on my screen. They were asking about whether the options of 2A and 2B, it's not an option, that we fill 2A first and then we move on to 2B. So those maps are in there, and that's what that describes as the cut and fill and final elevations of those areas, and it shows the cell development through each of those phases. But we can certainly, I could send an email with the map that's only really discussing the current areas. So we could have a map developed that shows some of the properties and the different cells that we've on the landfill in general.
That'd be great for quick reference, not the whole report text, but not that you don't have something else to do today and tomorrow, but
Yes.
okay, thanks, Amy.
Okay, so 195 is the placeholder for capital expense to develop the Eco Depot. It's a placeholder amount. That's what I think we had for development of the lease depot, and that was to do some site development by forklifts and a few pieces of equipment. Each location is going to have different requirements, so really that's just a placeholder. And if we come to the phase of a recommendation for contract award, this value may need to be adjusted, or if it's an in-house site development, then that would also need to be adjusted to reflect those expenses. So just pointing out that's a placeholder. So 196 and 197 are both associated with the legacy landfill. So 196 is the consulting work. And so that has gone under, we've gone through the stage 1 and we're moving into the stage 2. And then it'll be also involving the ministry on our plans. And so ideally we'll have that portion of the work wrapped up in 26. And then what you see on 197 is the construction work costs. And so 26 is for Crawford Bay. And so a lot of the locations where we continue to utilize the site as a transfer station, there's fairly minimal work. There's some litter management and various things. Boswell, though, is a site that we no longer are situated on, and so we've moved that closure work expense to 2029. And currently that's still the common placeholder of $1 million that will be refined as the remaining phases of the closure plans are developed. The washrooms for Boswell and Crawford Bay, those are sort of historic projects. We went through and did the larger, busier sites already, and some of the smaller rural areas have remained in the financial plan. I moved them to coincide. I think they were staggered, and I coincided them. Crawford Bay, we had, I think, planned for 25, and it didn't occur, so we're going to roll into 26. And but I moved it to 27 to coincide with the projected date for Boswell, because it's often more cost effective to kind of do them as one project. And Crawford Bay still we have to do, there was some concerns about establishing the septage in a floodplain. So we still have some more work to do on locating the septage for that site. So so we'll just continue to use porta potties at those 2 locations for the current period.
So on that particular item, is that a typical setup that you would see at a park where you've got a building over top concrete pad and a holding tank that you pump? Or is this a septic field that will be part of this 57,000?
Our intention was septic fields. The tanks, we have a bit of a problem with tanks because our septic receiving facilities are not designed to accept materials from those. Our septic receiving facilities, the lagoons, are permitted to accept septic tank pumpings, Creston is one of those ones where we don't have it at our landfill. That is at the town's facility. So there could be a change if we move, if they're accepting it at the wastewater treatment facility. We could investigate having the tanks if that's an acceptable material at that facility. So currently these are for septic fields, not just the holding tank.
Okay.
Okay. So you can see on line 200, we purchased a shack from the Central, and that was established at Crawford Bay. The line 201 is a replacement of some of the plates that we just spoke of. So we did replace a number of them in 25, and then we're projecting I think another 2 in 26. Yeah, we had 4 in 25 and then 2 in 26, and then we built in some rolling stock replacements of those. We rode those out quite a bit, and I have discovered that a number of them need replacement. We had a litter fence for Creston. We actually were hoping to have that this year, but it won't be received we'll have that early in the new year. And then line 202 is a rolling stock replacement of the bins for the Crawford Bay and Boswell waste hauling.
Ask the question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just curious, when we look at, the rolling, so line 202, you don't have like a projected, inflationary increase in there. Are they pretty standard prices, or, like, is it a safe bet that's what it's gonna be, or do we need to consider that?
I think that would be something we'd have to continue to update. Currently, we used to be able to buy 2 for 20,000, but now with delivery cost and such, we're usually able to purchase one under 20,000. So because they're metal, it kind of depends on value of metal. So that's just a essentially a placeholder, and would need to be sort of updated with each financial plan.
A bigger purchase. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then if we move further down, you can see the reserves. The regular reserves are the first section there, so line 214 to 218. They do get fairly thin in some of the mid years there, and I think that's something we need to continue keeping an eye on, to make sure that we retain reserves for the kind of reoccurring work. We're able to fund all the works that we're projecting in there. But if new items get added to the list in the next 5 years, there could be challenges financing them through regular reserves. The landfill closure reserve, so that's line 200 through 224. The east is the only sub-region that has had this landfill reserve for some time. I think it was around early 20s, that they transferred funds from around 900,000 from the regular reserves to this landfill closure reserve, and that's what is that sort of that $1 million that you see in the earlier years. And then we are adding the 880,000 in 25, so that gets us up to near 2 million. But then we're using just under $1 million for that phase 1 CD closure, and eventually we could use some of those funds for the phase 2A closure when we get closer. But we do need any funds that come out of there. We will need to develop a plan to reestablish the required funding in there based on what our design operation closure plan dictates for us. And then the stabilization reserves, that's we're using quite a bit of that in 25 for the lands purchase from the Lower Kootenay Band. And then I don't show any transactions to or from in the remaining of the financial plan. And that the intention of that is we usually put half of any prior year surplus by board resolution. Half remains in the service and half goes into the stabilization reserve. So that will be modified based on what our actuals are at the end of the year. And, it is the intention of that is that we can use it, especially for things like when we have a year where there's lower tipping fees, to be able to add some revenue to the service. So we'll see what comes of that. It had gotten to be a good value, and that's why we utilize some of it for the Lower Kootenay Band works. So there could be some changes to and from that in future years, but right now they're just not showing any adjustment to that.
So then the 850, that would have been the 300,000 economic development allocation that we agreed to give Lower Kootenay Band, plus the 550 plus the inflated or the upwardly adjusted value of the actual acreage, the land, because it took so long to transfer the land. So that's done now. And really, I think you said a month ago, we now have title to that land, to the parcel now. It's 100% done, subject to.
That is correct. By mid-end of October, we completed that process.
Okay, thanks. I'm wondering if we want to get up and take a stretch before we go into the other ones. We did start off talking about the requisition amount, and there's big moving parts in here. We don't know the cash flow requirement for town if they get on with actually building the septic receiving station, and how we may or may not be able to finance that, short-term loan, reserves, and or. And we don't know until we see the consultant's report in January, February, how much this Tolburn project is. Is it 2 million? Is it 1 million? So I guess any recommendation we want to make on the requisition, we could, anybody wants to make a recommendation, do that now. But the difference from 2026 projected requisition from a year ago to today's projection, the difference is 1%. So I don't know if it makes more sense to wait until we see what those bigger capital projects look like. Up to the committee, of course.
Well, I think assuming that we will have that information available to us January/February. So February is getting a little bit too late, though.
It's getting tight, and we would have our public presentations. Yeah, when is Creston going to get their public presentation? Do you know? That's penciled in now, isn't it? The budget presentation.
Yeah, sorry, Gary, what was the question?
Well, we're just thinking there's a couple of things that we won't know enough about until potentially February to do with the two larger capital projects for this service. When is the Creston area, like Greater Creston, public budget presentation scheduled for? Do you have a date penciled in?
Yeah, we haven't scheduled those yet, but we will be we'll be doing that soon. So probably starting second week of February and going through the first week of March. The Creston ones seemingly have been the later ones for whatever reason. So our plan is to have a consolidated budget at the January special budget meeting, and then coming out of that, if there's any adjustments or direction, we'll change that, and then we plan hopefully to fix the consolidated budget at the end of January, and that'll be used as the budget for the public budget meetings.
Okay, so yeah, hopefully we'll have some idea if there's gonna be any shifting between the years on those capital projects. So if there's no recommendation on this one, we can get up and stretch right now. This meeting is scheduled to go another hour, which goes through Crest lunch hour, but for staff, it's only 11 o'clock there. Is that fine? Do we get up and stretch? If there's no other
Yeah.
questions on this?
Chair, if you don't mind, I'll just quickly point out just the items that you were speaking about. Although the values are, still to be determined, they're funded through reserves or borrowing. So they really, even if those values change, they don't impact the revenue from taxation required in 26. They may have impact in future years, but not having that 8% this year, it is more operational need than capital expense related.
So then through the chair, because I'm interested in the conversation on the A service side, before I suggest anything to change what we've been through, and in light of what Amy just said, let's have a break and then operate into the 8, 16, and 19.
Okay, let's go for 10 minutes. It says it's noon in Creston, so at 10 past the hour, whatever hour you're tracking, we'll resume. Have a 10-minute break. Okay, so.
Noon?
Okay, a meeting here, we will call the meeting back to order. It's 10 minutes past the hour. And Manager Wilson, you're gonna move into A116 East Recycling, I guess, next. The floor is yours again.
Okay, thank you. So we have the user fees, so that is the incentives from Recycle BC on line 1. Line 2 is the sub-regional equalization payment that's transferred from the West's incentives. That happens also for Central because West has more core depots than the other two sub-regions. So you can see the projected is less than the budget. I went into the original draft that I discussed with Uli and Yev, actually had a lower amount than this. I went in and got the most up-to-date service statements and projected it from there, and it increased a little bit. So we're a little bit closer to our budget with the projected year-end values. West was over the expected budget and Central and East were under, and Recycle BC changed the way that they did the accounting for our system. And previously we were under one job and we split into 3 separate jobs. They weren't sending the detailed information in spreadsheets. They were doing it with PDFs, and we've been bugging them to send it in spreadsheets so that it's easier for us to analyze the data. So Akane did go through, and we were a bit concerned that maybe there was incentives going to the wrong subregion. It does look, she did some analysis when this was discovered and confirmed the right locations are associated to the right jobs. So I think that because these new incentives changed and the structure of the rates changed quite a bit. So not only does each material have a different rate, but depending on the volume that we collect at each depot, you get a different rate. So the rate per ton is actually higher at lower volume sites than at higher volume sites. So we applied a 118% increase based on the expected increase to incentives, but that was a value that was kind of generalized over all the different materials at all the different depots. And so, you know, I'm not overly surprised that we're not exactly where the budget's at because there's a lot of variables there. So moving forward, I think we can feel a little bit more comfortable with this new rate structure and what our expected budgets will be.
So I have two points on this, if I could, Amy. So when exactly did the nominal 118% increase come, like, or sort of the average? Was that mid-year 2025? You had told us before, but I'm can't recall.
January 1st of 25.
So it was a full year, okay.
Yeah.
And then you said for 26, they're reviewing it. So they didn't publish anything or project any increases. They're just gonna review it again in 2026?
Correct. I actually believe that they will apply new rates starting January 1st again, but they haven't identified what that is. And largely they said that it would be to reflect like inflation for the most part. So.
Okay, and then the other one, and I brought it up at both the West and the Central, this transfer between the equalization transfer, which is considerable, $24,500 for us projected for 2026. As you alluded to, Andy, that's because we couldn't divide 4 depots up into half or third depots. So we should have had 1.7 core depots based on population of the East. We have 1 instead of 2, because strategically we wanted to make Recycle BC pay for the maximum hauling that we could get out of the deal by giving more than 4 depots to West. And so that's what the transfer is for. Now, because the incentives are a different scale, depending on the volume, some of our satellite depots are going to get a little bit more fair reimbursement now than they did when we came up with this formula, for how much West would reimburse Central and East for them taking most of the core depots. So it's something I brought up at both the other things. It's not to our advantage, East necessarily. That through the year, I wouldn't be surprised if this figure got smaller, because we do get a few more dollars per ton out of the small sites like Boswell, Yak, or Crawford Bay than we did before. So we're not as bad off having mostly satellite depots as we were a year ago. We're a little better off. It may not be a very significant difference, but in fairness, because I've heard so much seen so much scrutiny over who's paying for what, that I wouldn't be surprised if over the year we see an adjustment to that figure. And I don't know if you guys have looked any further at that since then, Amy, or is that a summer 2026 exercise?
Yeah, I think that'll be a post-budget exercise, so, but yeah, it's something we can look into, especially once we see what they change the rates to in 26.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Not a lot more in the next number of accounts for this service. So you can see on line 14, we have the transfer from S186 to support the service. And on line 16, we're actually projecting to have a bit of a deficit, largely due to the difference in incentives.
Lower volume.
Yeah. So moving into salaries, we have a portion of the lead hand split with the waste service, because the lead hand's main intention is collecting cash, and but they also provide emergency coverage for shifts. They do training, they deliver supplies, they collect site information, so that their services or their support is also used at the recycling. So that's why a portion of it remains in the recycling service.
Can you briefly speak to salaries dropping in that service?
Well, so Uli just asked me to speak to the salaries. So there's a salary worksheet that the operations group and I develop or use for forecasting budgets, and there was some revisions to the hours dedicated largely to the Creston Car Wash. And so that's why the value has dropped in 26. Sorry, was there a question in the room there?
Yeah, so my question is, and I'll put it to you this way, were you fully staffed in 2025, or do you have any gaps or openings? I understand that one of the three lead hands position was open for a period of time, kind of thing. So that's why I'm asking, are you having any issues and are you fully staffed throughout 2025?
Yes, thank you. So on line 20, you'll see the projected year end is quite a bit below the budget, and that's because the lead hand position was not filled for a significant portion of the year. We now have a lead hand. She's been in that role for a number of months, and so the lead hand, we are fully staffed. We also we're just undergoing a transition right now for the field supervisor for that area. Our field supervisor, I think it was in the fall, left the position. So the other two field supervisors and the operations supervisor, Amy, had to support the subregion to fill that role. We're actually doing some shuffling. So the field supervisor for the central subregion is moving to the east, and we've just extended an offer for a new field supervisor for the central subregion. So we expect to be fully staffed in 26 with both of those lead roles. In regards to general staffing, I think that we have been maintaining adequate staffing. across that subregion.
Okay. Carry on, please.
Again, the overtime and benefits follow what we just spoke about. Nothing sizably new in the health and safety or directors area, similar with travel and training. And then a lot of these next couple of accounts don't have a significant amount of adjustment. Some areas we've reduced the budget where we aren't spending what the budgets were allocated. So where possible, we reduced it to be more reflective of actuals.
So the boost, the boost in hauling magically erases the boost we got for the material we are hauling.
Correct, yeah, so line 48, you can see our expenses are higher than expected, so we've used that actuals to reflect future year budgets for that. You know, Connie and I are doing some analysis on the difference of whether this is satellite or ICI. Certainly in the central subregion, our ICI expenses have been increasing in some particular locations. So we're trying to keep an eye on that. I think it's just in Creston so far that we have the ICI contract. So I don't know that that's what's experiencing here, but we are investigating why those expenses. It's not a new contract, so it is largely due to volumes, I would assume.
So we never went to a baler for the cardboard. And that old corrugated cardboard was one extra cost we said would help out the mom and pop businesses with. Is it time to look at that now? Or did you look further into it for the last year or two?
Yeah, through the chair, we've actually asked Waste Management for some cost estimates to develop ICI collection at Crawford Bay, Slocan, at a few new locations. So that might be something that will be coming to you in the new year about whether or not we want to consider that.
But are they still hauling the cardboard loose all the way back to, is it going to Cranbrook or Trail or wherever?
The material from the east subregion goes to Cranbrook, yes, and it is loose.
Right, so baling it might help or compress it.
I mean, when you bail materials, you actually get a higher incentive, and like you mentioned, there would be improved efficiencies with hauling, but the cost of establishing and operating a baler and situating it in our current locations, we don't have that capacity. But if we in future years move to a different location or move in-house, then that might be something we could consider.
I thought Home Building, before it changed ownership, I thought he was talking about buying a cardboard baler and Save On and Pilo's Groceries probably have balers as well. That's another option. Ask if one of the larger entities in town, businesses that has a big flow through cardboard is already, maybe they could bail it for us.
Yeah, could consider that. You know, when they get at those kinds of locations, they're basically loading a box at a time kind of thing. Like we'd have to really consider if we could bring a roll-off bin and unload it and be able to put it through the baler efficiently, or if they would have the capacity and space to do that. But
we would just leave it there. We just leave them a roll-off bin and say, throw it through your machine when you have a minute. Anyway, possibility.
yeah.
So
And
let you carry on.
Okay, so line 49 and 50 were work orders that we developed to track garbage and portable toilets and snow removal separately. However, it wasn't being consistently coded that way across the district. And so as you can see that those expenses are just going to be fully accounted in line 48 moving forward. we're able to pull all of those invoices through Aggresso and track those services separately on the back end. So it just didn't kind of hold the value that we were hoping, or we were thinking it would when we developed those work orders. So just to remain consistent, we'll be coding everything to that line 48 for contracted services moving forward. Yeah, repairs and maintenance, operating supplies, nothing significant there. Here with the equipment, utilities. On line 160, you can see that is the lease for the car wash and a very limited rental for the Ryandell depot.
That's a rental fee for that physical space in those two locations?
Correct, that's the lease for those locations.
That's,
That's for the entities to house themselves there, or they have that lease and we're paying them?
So for the most part, that is the Creston Car Wash, and that is the lease that we pay the property owner for that back portion of his property. It does also include snow removal in that item, actually.
Yeah, okay.
Part of the lease agreement.
and the other would be just a transfer between regional district services, but again, snow removal, I guess.
So you can see on line 62 and 64, the short-term loan for the Recycle BC site development and infrastructure is completed in 25. So that's great to see that drop off. And then what our projection was previously, that once the short-term borrowing dropped off, that we would increase the transfer to reserves. I think this will be really informed by the asset management program. We did not allocate a transfer to the asset management program in the recycling services. We will be assessing the sites and the infrastructure, but we'll just do that expenditure through the waste service because these ones are fairly limited. So we don't expect it to be a significant amount of work, but once that is input and the plan projects things, we will likely in next year's plan or certainly the one after have that transfer to reserve more accurately designed to the infrastructure in place. That 18,000 was developed with the original capital expenditure for the sites, but there's a lot of the projecting the lifespan of things like sea cans and whatnot will be more detailed once we get the asset management plan in place. So 68 is the transfer to the A102 resource recovery service. And so that is 20% of that requirement is allocated to the recycling. 70% was to the waste service and 10% goes to the compost service. So it's split between the waste and the allocation service associated with it. 70 and 72 are the general admin and IT placeholders. As I mentioned, IT was updated with the actuals required for that service, but the general admin is still a placeholder. Similarly with the line 74, that's A100 environmental services, and that one currently is a placeholder as well. And then we don't have any capital plans expected for this service, and the transfer, the reserves at the bottom of the budget there are at this point just transfers to. We don't have any plans to pull from in the current period. Any questions? We'll move on to the compost.
I guess I have to have a closer look later because with the dropping off of the loan principal and interest, we didn't put as much into the reserve or asset management reserve as I thought we would. I'm just wondering where all the rest of the money went. I guess $1,000 here $1,000 there. Because we dropped $57,500 off of the borrowing. We only ended up with 18,000 left over to go in reserve. Just have to scrutinize it later, I guess. This is one where I was hoping to see the burden on the S-186 reduced a little more. Let's see, it is, I guess it's down. Well, no, it's not. Anyway, I'll look at it further, I guess. Let you go ahead to the organic segment.
I was just looking back, and so the budget for 2024 in the recycling was closer to between 400,000 and 500,000. So it has dropped.
It's tapered off, yeah.
Okay, so A119, this is our East Compost. You can see the sales of service were a little bit under what we had budgeted. We are projecting some increase over this current year, largely because of the ramping up our ICI and the ICI regulation that's upcoming in 2026. So we do expect to see increases, but we're trying to be modest about what to expect there. And I think too, as we continue to develop self-haul and rural areas, we could see some increases, but again, trying to be conservative on that. The user fees on line 3, that is the funding for the compost sales. Again, that's fairly modest, and as we get better understanding of volumes produced and what we wish to sell it for, that will be updated. And again, we didn't see any funds in 25 because we donated it to Fields Forward. We'll be doing another round of screening and have finished compost in 2026. And so before we move forward on that, we'll be returning to the committee and getting your direction on how to manage that. This budget is expecting we will sell it, but if the committee has another direction, we'll be able to talk about it at that time.
Amy, do you know if Fields Forward has picked up very much of that compost yet?
From my understanding, it all they got it all, yeah.
Okay, one shot, okay.
Yeah, because they have a stockpile created on their site there now, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So on line 7.5, you'll see that we have. This is where you'll start to see changes from our previous budget, where we contracted all of these services out, or all of the service out, to taking this in-house. And the intention would be, I believe it's around June or something like that, that transition will occur. So we're in the process of investigating the purchase of a loader and the style of the loader. Our operations supervisor, Larry, has been investigating units, and currently we are actually investigating an electric unit, but we're still looking at options, and we'll be coming to the committee with authorization to advance on a purchase probably in January.
So what's the incentive to look at an electric unit?
Maybe I speak a little bit to it. So it's actually not the incentives driving it. It's the current offered sales prices on these units. These units originally same or higher than diesel units are offered in portion at 2/3 of the cost of a diesel unit. We are looking a little bit more at the details. There's as well battery capacity and things that play into it. Why it looks like a feasible unit other than the purchase price is the amount of hours it is used. That's conducive to an electric unit. It's not a unit that's running 8 hours or 10 hours a day, like in a mining or any other environment. It would have lower maintenance costs. It would not require the establishment of a diesel tank, which is always as well subject to theft issues, and having to service that diesel tank, meaning getting fuel in small quantities that unit would be using. Our staff has looked at a unit. Our staff is in contact with an Okanagan composting facility that has that comparable unit for more than 2 years in service. Got feedback from them. There's a lot of it speaking for it, but like I said, we haven't fully concluded that analysis yet, but it looks promising.
Well, it's good to hear. I mean, of course, your kilowatt hours versus your fuel and maintenance on a diesel unit. But then I don't know how you're going to assume a resale value on that because it's so new. That will be a challenge, but I'll be interested to hear what Larry.
Resale value is anybody's guess, right? It is really a question of how these types of units establish in the market. So that's not easy to establish. The fact that it performed well over these 2.5 years in a operating environment with actually more hours than it would have in our environment makes me hopeful. So if it has lasted that long, big question is always battery replacement period. What we see out of the car world is actually these batteries performing well in regards to how long they last. Like I said, we will come back with a comprehensive report on that.
How are we set up for power at the site? I mean, you can have a rapid or a slower charging unit, but when we got the power drop, it also had to allow additional blowers, doesn't it? Because we can expand the rows and composts.
The costing will be fully inclusive of establish a charger unit there. Essentially, we might even be able to get away with just a regular plug-in, but we are pricing it out, and the intent would be establishing a charger there, and that would be part of the overall cost consideration. The supply is there to install that, so we have actually a budgetary cost from the electrician that works on that site, what that would cost.
And some expectation as to what the future potential of the grid to be able to support not just this, but any of these electric type of units. I mean, that's all we're hearing is that the grid is, taxed, and our infrastructure to our high tension lines are maxed out, and so I mean, you have to build in some sort of a disruption due to potential power grid.
We're putting 6 solar panels at this site to run the blowers and to charge the machine. Might end up being what you have to do.
Could be, but solar panels don't do well in this cloudy environment.
Well, Preston's better than where I live on the East Shore. Anyway, thanks, Uli.
I mean, the grid is certainly capable of supplying it, but I don't know what the local lines are looking like, but it is in comparison a relatively small draw when you consider what a unit like that draws on the overall grid. It will charge largely overnight, where the grid is anyhow at low demand. So yeah, I can't see grid being an issue.
Well, I think it might be, we have a electric school bus, an EV school bus here in SDA. And in the wintertime, it really doesn't run. It's unreliable. I get that the technology and the batteries and that sort of thing. But the fact that it's unreliable takes one to notice.
So see what your numbers come up with on it. It's a couple hours a day, I guess.
Bus.
Okay. Are we losing connection? Are you guys good for audio?
Yeah, we can.
Yes.
Okay, our screen is glitched out a little bit here, but I guess it's okay. Okay. Continue, I guess, Amy.
Okay, so line 9 is transfer from reserve. So we had some funding brought into the service a year or two ago to support a capital expenditure that didn't proceed. So it just got carried through in the prior year surplus. So actually in 26, I'm proposing that we just put that into reserve to be clear that that's not just a surplus. And so you'll see in 2027, we're removing that out of that reserve to fund a capital project. Then on line 11, that is the transfer from the waste service S186 to support this service. And after the in the future years of the plan, that drops off quite a bit. And part of that is largely due to the financing drops off as an expense. And on the short-term loan to establish the facility. So line 13, that surplus largely, as I mentioned, is to do with the leachate pond management capital expense that's projected to come in 27. And part of the reason we've moved that work into 27 is because we have a similar issue with facility at Central, and we're investigating a number of different options, not just creating a larger pond, but also potentially investigating treatment and discharge, and would require a permit under the organic matter recyclation regulation. Compost facilities are not allowed to discharge without a permit. So we deferred the project here to 27 to give us time to investigate these various options at Central and then apply any lessons learned here in Creston. Currently, when the pond gets, and you'll see a report referencing this at the joint meeting this week, when the pond gets near capacity, we actually have to pump it, and then we send the material to the septage receiving stations at the wastewater treatment plant. So we do have a way to manage this. It's just a fairly high cost operationally going forward. And so that's what the intention of this work would be, is that we can reduce that ongoing, or actually remove entirely that ongoing operational cost and just manage it on site. So we deferred it to 27 to give us time to make sure that we assess all the options and find the most cost effective way to move forward with that. Okay, so then moving into expenses, you'll see that previously the salaries and employee related expenses were not in the service because we contracted all of the work. You'll see that there's still, so we started to onboard the staffing expenses. So it's a start in that in-house operations, the compost facility starts in June. So the 2026 values are reflective of a part year, is a part-time position or part-time operations. So that's what we're projecting moving forward. And in 26, although the facility in-house operations start in June, we do have onboarding of that new staff person a month or two earlier so that they can spend time training with our contractor as well as our in-house operations at Central. So we did have a bit of a buffer there to onboard that staff person as well.
So at what point in time do you feel that you'll be able to do an assessment on the onboarding on this decision that we can determine did we make the right decision?
Years from now.
So, sorry, again, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, we decided to go in-house with this service, eliminating contractors, and because the numbers seem favorable. And then at some point, we want to be able to evaluate those numbers that in fact we made and as Gary pointed out, it could be a year, could be 18 months, that in fact we made a good decision to go in-house as opposed to stay with contractor.
Yeah, I suspect we'll only have a part year at the end of 26. I mean, we'll assess cost based on budget at this time next year. But it might take, because there'll be onboarding time, there'll be a lot of new equipment that we will need to purchase that for our internal operations. So and some of those things will be new onboarding costs that won't be a reoccurring thing in future years. So ideally we have some a glimpse at that at this time next year, but it might be the 27 budget, but when we've got a good year plus under our belts.
See you in 27.
I think there's two stages. The one is the first one, and that comes fairly soon, is our capital cost assumptions, are they correct? Which is almost the bigger part. And then the second part is you pretty well need a years of operation to have routine operational numbers. So there's two assessment steps. One we will already be able to do mid-26, the other one will be mid-27.
Yeah, so the director's values are similar to previous years. The travel is a new one, staffing related, and some of that expense on line 30 is because we expect to have the in-house operator from Central travel over to Creston and assist with some of the training as well as coverage when the staff person in Creston has holidays or other reasons for leave. So we've added the budget in there to accommodate that travel. Similarly on 32, professional development. So that is the higher in 26 because we expect the new staff to have to take some training for compost operations, and then future years would just be ongoing training. Nothing significant. The next couple of accounts, communications, we have added in some additional expenses for the new operator, and they would have to have a cell phone. And advertising, sort of ongoing expenses there, similar to insurance. With the licenses and permits, so we have a groundwater license. the application is still pending. And so that is estimating that we'll start to pay that in 26. Line 46, we had a certain type of software we were going to utilize. We did not end up adopting that, so I've removed that from the budget. Line 48, Transform Compost Systems is the designer of the facility and frequently our expert when we have questions. So we've added a placeholder of $1,000 for support of onboarding the new operator in 26. Line 50, you can see that drops off, so we're expecting that expense until the end of May, and then that drops right off. The contracted services on line 51 are largely to do with our lab and environmental monitoring, but it also includes the management of the leachate pond. And so we do expect that to drop off pending having the pond management onboarded by around 27, and that will be reflective of when that pond management construction works occur. Repairs and maintenance, so line 53.5, you can see it's a new line there to expect some repairs and maintenance, tires, that kind of thing for the new loader. Some increase with the operating supplies on line 55 because we will now be managing that more on our own, including things like winter sand, because that will no longer be under the contract of the landfill operations. On line 57 for equipment, we have some expenses in 26 to take on some of the hand tools and various things that currently the contractor supplies, and then back down to regular consumables after in 27 and on. Line 59 is the power, mostly like the blowers and such at the moment. Line 59 and 1/3 is fuel for the loader, but if we move to electric, then we expect that would be allocated to the line above in utilities. So that expense would come in the form of diesel or power, depending on what unit we move forward with. And if it moves to power, it could be less, and we'll reflect that when we have that final decision. Lines 59 and 2/3 for rentals there, that is the value of the renting the screening unit. And so currently we have a unit that we brought in to Central to screen and Creston and produce the material. We at one point did have a capital budget for purchasing a screener. We've moved it to rentals so that we can, for the coming years, so that we can trial what type of screener we might want. And ideally in the future, we may look at purchasing again and making sure that it's a unit that screens for the product that we want to be selling, and also could be shared between the two subregions. It's ideal if we have a screener more at our disposal throughout the year, so that we can do screening when the piles are drier. Makes it easier to screen. And so I think in the future we could potentially see this expense get moved to potentially a financing or transfer to Central to fund the actual purchase of a screener. But at this time, we're just still in the rental and trial. We did actually, a company in Creston just manufactured a screening unit for that Transform Compost Systems that I mentioned earlier, for use at a different regional district. And we actually had an opportunity to do a trial of that. And so that actually might be an item or a unit that we might consider. It was a good opportunity to try it on site with our material and try it out firsthand. And our operations supervisor and our compost operator in Central went over and had a look at it and my understanding was they were fairly impressed with it, so we'll continue to investigate that. Short-term financing, line 61, that is the repayment of the short-term loan for the compost facility, so that expires in 2026. And on line 61.5, that's the equipment financing, so that would be the repayment of equipment financing loan for the loader purchase. Similarly, 63 and 63.5, those are the principal for those same loans. So line 65, that is contribution to reserve. So again, similar to the recycling service, we had the transfer to regular reserves at fairly low with the intention of increasing once the short-term loan was paid off. So that's where that transition from 5,000 to 45,000 occurs. But in 2026, I'm also moving 162,000. That is that capital funding that has been carried in the service, and just wanted to move it into reserves to just be sure to earmark it for that capital project and not have it sit in the reserve or in the service and get carried through as it has been in the last year or two. Line 67, project management. So assuming that project management would support with the pond. Oh, I should have actually moved that to 2027. So I will make that adjustment. I don't know that there's any works in 26 that they would. Oh, sorry, there are some works in 26. So I think I just missed adding some in 27 to reflect support for the pond. So I might have to add a few thousand there. Line 67.5 is the transfer to asset management, and similar, so the recycling services similar to waste, the compost facilities, because they have a lot more infrastructure, does have an allocation to the asset management. So again, it's higher in the first few years to do the facility assessments and develop the data required for the asset management plan, and then in future years, it's just an ongoing maintenance of that plan. And then line 69 is the transfer to A102. That's the resource recovery service. 10% of that expense is allocated to compost here.
Just as a note, the A100, A102 budgets have not been completed yet, so these are a little bit of placeholders. There might be a variation in there.
Similar with line 71, the general admin, that the budgets were prepared before that value was added to planner. I don't recall checking all the allocation services, so I'm not sure how far off, but again, that is a placeholder. IT was updated with the 26 budget, so that is reflective of what IT was going to require of the service. And then, as Uli just mentioned, line 75 for the A100 service, that again is a placeholder to be determined. So then we're in capital expenditures. So line 77, that is where we had the leachate pond management. So whether that's a larger pond or some treatment and a discharge permit to be associated, whichever, we'll be assessing those options, and we'll come back once we have more details on whether or not what the options are and what the cost effectiveness and ongoing operational costs would be of all of them. There is the value in 26 though to do some work on the outlet ditch from that pond, so that's what that 20,000 is for. Line 77.5 is the expense of the new loader, and as mentioned, it would include the charging station if we go with electric, not just so that's all included in that 180,000 estimate. And then line 78 is.
Can you move the slide up? Yeah, thanks. I was only seeing down to 71 there. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, so then line 78, that is an irrigation system that was a rollover from a previous year, so that work hadn't proceeded yet, so that's projected for 26. And then the reserve, so line 85 through 89 is just demonstrating what we currently have in there. We're expecting to pull some in 26 as well as add that that money in, and then that the 167, and then that gets pulled from the reserves in 27 to move forward on the pond project. So,
So
questions, comments?
Yeah, I have a bit of a comment. So this is one, again, we have a loan dropping off, and I understand why, but you're recommending pretty well put all of that savings, that available funding back into reserve or into reserve. And this is where, you know, we've been looking for our asset management plans sort of to pull together and bring it up in different services, whether it's recreation or the library, different things continually. Do we have any rough target as to what the contribution to reserve should be? Say this service, we might have $3 million of asset there. I think we borrowed about $1 million. We had the loan, the grant from the province, 2/3. We might have $3 million there. Rather than just by default putting all of the available funding because the loan dropped off into the reserve, we could give some of that back to the taxpayer this year if we're fairly comfortable that this other number we flag from now on to keep putting into reserve for future asset management is reasonable. And to the taxpayer, they might like to see the relief sooner than waiting another year. To our 20 or 30 or 40-year asset replacement, I mean, the concrete slab is good for 50 years plus. That steel, that metal, that shed is probably good for pushing 50 years. The loader, of course, not. But we have almost all new equipment, new assets there. So is this a year where we could give some of this reduction in expenses by not having to pay the loan? Is this a year, 2026, where we could give some of that back to the taxpayer instead of going higher than projected with the previous 2026 budget? We actually maybe go a little lower, split the difference to the future amount, the 2027 and beyond projected amount that we have to transfer to subsidize. So it'd be nice just to have a dart thrown as to what our actual long-term reserve contribution should be.
Yeah, so through the chair, the transfer to reserve, the regular reserve in 26 is actually only 5,000 still. We don't change to that 45,000 increase until 27. And the 162,000 isn't that is money that came from an East regular, like an S186 regular reserve, specifically for this pond project. So it's not, we don't use reserves to fund operations. And so if we don't, essentially that larger transfer to reserves in 26 is just parking that capital funding that's just been sitting in the service. And it originally was closer to 200,000. We did do some capital works, but my concern is leaving it in the service. We start to spend that regular reserve money as part of operations. And so I parked it in the reserve in 26 to make sure that we earmark that money that came from reserves for the capital project and not operations. So I would hazard about trying to reduce the transfer from S186, because if we do that, essentially we're using those reserve funds for operations. And then we need to refund that project when it comes in 27. Does that make sense?
Well, partially, I gotta say, because I have to go top to bottom and see where, I mean, operations are gonna go up because of the transition to in-house. We still have to pay the contract price. The contract price is pretty hefty because I think our 8-month extension was $300,000. But in this transition, we're not gonna do anything with the pond till 2027. So you don't have to move that money over in 26, it'll still be in the other fund. Just, I'm wondering if there is, with such a huge reduction in expenses with this loan dropping off, we've consumed almost all of that, you're saying, in projected new operating costs for 2026. I'm just gonna run my own little spreadsheet here again. And if we don't need the money for the fund until 2027, we can wait and make that transfer in 2027, because we may not build a pond. We may find pumping and hauling using Creston or something is cost effective. That instead of designing, building, and adding something to the site, we may find we can go 10 years just moving when we have a surplus of water in the pond, just move it to Creston. In the next decade, if we get these long dry drought sections, we may find that pond performs better. And we're gonna get more water in the winter by projections, but we don't have to build the pond in 26. Why move the money in 26?
Well, the money came into the service around 24. And so that money is reserve money. So if we do not spend that on the pond, I think my recommendation would be we transfer it back to S186 and it goes back into reserves and not just fund operations of this one service. I mean, I guess that would be a decision for the committee to do, but we could also not transfer it into reserves and just leave it in the service as it has been for the next few years. But I don't want to confuse the fact that that's not an operational surplus. That is money that was transferred from a reserve for a capital project.
It was earmarked already, not part, yeah, that makes sense now.
Yeah.
Just one note, it looks like we have for the leachate works transfer from reserves of 15, but a project of 20. So you might want to adjust that. I think you have a capital project of 20 for the leachate works for the design or whatever.
Yeah, and we have the irrigation as well. So that's why
What's with the
it's included in it's being funded by the there's more capital works than we have capital works funding in, so it's actually some of the capital works are being funded by the transfer from S186 on line 111 or on line 11.
Okay, got that, thanks.
Okay, you don't need to change anything now. I guess I'm just gonna spend part of my Christmas adding up both of these where we're dropping major loan payments. And it seems to be we're consuming that advantage, that flexibility by operational costs. I know the transition in the organics to in-house is gonna be almost some double cost while we get rid of the contract in-house. That's something I'll ponder on, or as Director Newell left us, I will ponderate that, as Director Newell might say. So yeah, I don't have any other comments right now. From the committee, any recommendations? Just wait and see how this looks. There's a lot of placeholders here still, and Amy's still trying to get proper numbers for our general and main those costs. Any other committee comments?
The thing that I'm always interested in is, and we talked about this before, is the tonnage. And I'd like to know what tonnage values are from year to year, so I can see what's going up, what's going down. It sounds like this particular 2025, we had a tonnage going down, which affected our revenues. I'd also like to see what 2024 was in comparison, but not just for general landfill, but anything that can be measured in terms of the tonnage. It's always easier to grasp what the effects and the changes are on the operational side, not so much the capital side, but on the operational side, when you have those type of values that you can reflect on.
So is that a report you can see again, Amy, in the next little while, or will it sort of the overall? Would that'd be something we'd certainly see next time we look at the fees and charges bylaw, which is several months out. I guess we'll look at short term, but if we decide we're going to change the course and increase tipping fees across all regions.
And that's kind of my point. Once I get to see what's happening on a craft, maybe part of the decision that we need to be talking about is a greater increase in tipping. You know, maybe that is part of what we should be looking at for down the future. But without knowing what the trends are doing, which helps in that regard, it's hard to make that call. You don't want to, as a frequent user of the landfill, I mean, I don't want my costs going up, but I also know that I also believe in user pay. And, you know, and I don't believe that someone should be subsidizing my portion of my refuse. And, so that's why I'm interested in looking at things that way. It just helps with trying to make that decision, because when you look at, in the beginning, we talked about an 8% increase in requisition. Gary talks that's about, for every point, that's $16,000. To me, that was relevant, because as I'm going through there, these things are in my mind. And to ask in the beginning, what are those factors that influence the cost? And Amy, you did a good job of pointing out that 6 or 7 things. Once again, then I can watch that as I go through the budget. So, you know, we talked about how many days should we be opening the landfill? But you've done a very good job of saying that the labor cost is not a huge cost here. And so you reduce that level of service, and what benefit do you get from that? You know, it's the cost of doing business when it comes to the landfill is what it is. And at the end of the day, for every ton that comes in, it's got to be charged a certain value that pays for the expenses of running that landfill.
Just one comment. I think one thing we need to address is the septic revenue in portion being offset, transferred to septic reserve.
Mhm.
I don't think we showed that yet.
Right.
Okay.
That would be in the S-186 budget.
Yeah,
You're right.
but I only see 2 transfers, one to the liability and one to the regular capital, but no transfer to the septic reserve.
Right.
I guess which we still have to establish.
It would be just moved out of the regular reserve. So the regular reserve would be reduced, and then transferred to septic reserve would be, yeah. So.
Okay. Yep. But so as background, we intend to and have to establish a septic reserve. We haven't established that, so we need to at some point separate what is in the capital reserve that is actually allocated or should be allocated to a septic reserve. A little bit of background. We did 2 consecutive, going to have a second consecutive septic disposal fee increase. The intent was to go from, we did originally from $50 per ton, where that revenue is split between the town of Creston and the regional district for disposal side of the septic piece. We went to $70, so that $20 increase should have been going straight into a reserve allocated to the septic service. And we are in the process of going to 90, or are we already at 90? No, we're going to 90. I forget. But we have identified consecutive increases to the septic fee, and all of the revenue from that increase over and above the $50, which is generally speaking the assumed operational cost, should be going into reserve. So we need to pull that apart, what we did since then, and establish that reserve, which will be dearly needed to finance future septic related capital expenses.
Okay, I don't see any other questions here. We got lots to digest. Say we'll see some minor adjustments when you get the other updates where you have placeholders. We do have Todd's bylaw amendment on here, table 1, proposed tipping fee increases on a 5-year schedule. So I could have changed 2026, but it's 2027, 8 and 20, 29 on that. If you want to ramp up the user fees, that's the place to bring that conversation, I guess. So thanks very much. No other input from anybody? We're at, 1:15 local time. Let's call for questions from the public then. We have one member of the public in the room here, and we still have people online. I gotta go back there. Questions from the room? Mr. Ricks, no questions? Online, do you have any questions from the public online? If so, this would be the time. I see one person, Andrew. If you want to unmute yourself, you can ask a question of this committee. I'll just pause for a minute because I was heavily criticized once for adjourning a meeting too quickly. So not hearing any questions from the public. I look, it's still 1:15 on my time here. Look for a motion to adjourn. Moved in the room and seconded, without objection. We are adjourned. Thanks very much, everybody. And see you all tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And the next day for some.